Hey guys, it's Jen. Welcome back. Today we're going to be doing another new palette dupes video. So it's been a while since I did one of these, but that's mainly just because new releases have really slowed down over the past month or so for obvious reasons. At one point I was doing these almost every single week and new releases were just out of control, but it's nice to have a little break every now and then. But I think now more than ever, when so many people are just reining in their spending a little bit and focusing on essentials, a video like this is great because it helps us to shop our stash and see what we might have in our collection already. It just helps to kind of, when you're tempted looking at Sephora or Ulta's website late at night while you're just sitting around home and all these pretty new things are coming up, it just helps us to realize, you know what, maybe I don't really need that. So before we get started, I just want to quickly answer some of the comments and questions that I was getting on these videos last time because there was some confusion on what these videos are actually intended to do. So the first one is people were saying these are not dupes. They're like similar palettes but not dupes. And I'm calling them dupes because they're similar and you can get similar looks out of them. But no, they're not meant to be shade for shade dupes. I just think that when you have a palette in your collection that has a lot of the same shades in it, it might not make sense to buy the new palette. The second one is people were saying these can't be dupes because you can't compare the formula of a drugstore palette to high end. I mean, sometimes you actually can. There are some really fantastic drugstore options out there, but no, this is not a formula dupes video. I'm really just matching the colors together, and honestly, drugstore palettes are pretty good these days where even if it's not exactly the high-end formula, you can always work with it a little bit, maybe wet the shimmer shades or pack it on a little bit more and you'll be fine. And then the last thing is sometimes I'll talk about a drugstore palette and say that a high-end palette is a dupe for it, and people were saying that's backwards. You're supposed to be like saving us money, but that's not really, again, the point of this video. I'm not trying to find cheaper versions of palettes. What I'm doing is trying to avoid repetition in our collection. So if you have the drugstore version of it already and the high-end one is coming out and it's like very similar colors, maybe you don't need to necessarily go out and purchase it. So it's really just about stopping you from buying something that's very similar to what you already have versus finding like a cheaper dupe, if that makes sense. Alright, so first up we have the Spritz Edit by Viseart. So this palette is a really beautiful coral palette. It definitely screams summer to me, and I think the color story is so beautiful. Plus they're actually doing a really nice thing and giving essential workers 20% off the palette, which I thought was such a nice idea. But as I was looking through my collection and looking around online, I definitely found some palettes that look really similar in case you are tempted by this one. So the first one I thought of immediately when I saw this was the ColourPop Sweet Talk palette. This one has a lot of very similar shades in it. You have that shimmery gold, you have those coral colors, you also have that brown that has a little bit of like orange behind it, and then you have that shimmer shade that's kind of taupey, almost like a little bit of a grayish brown. There's definitely tons of similarity between these two. I think if you have the ColourPop one, you may not need to go out and buy the Viseart. The next one that I thought of was the Huda Beauty Coral Obsessions palette. So this one has a few less shades. The Viseart has 12 and the Coral Obsessions has 9, and really what I see that you're kind of missing from it are the lighter, more ivory colors. In the Huda palette, you don't have those. So I don't think this one is quite as similar as the ColourPop one, but I definitely think, again, it has that very similar vibe to it. And then the last one I found is the Violet Voss Coral Crush palette. This one is a lot bigger. You have a ton more shades in it, but again, it has that pop of yellow. You have the shimmery gold. You have all of those beautiful coral colors in here. You have that taupey shimmer from what I could see in the top row. You have your matte ivory. The brown that's in the top right-hand corner of the Viseart palette looks like it's very similar on the bottom row towards the left of the Violet Voss. So if you already have the Violet Voss one, I think you do definitely have a lot of similar shades as the Viseart palette. Next up we have the Buxom Extrovert palette. I definitely did a double take when I saw this on Ulta's website. I thought it was an Anastasia palette at first, and it's not like anything we've ever seen from Buxom before. I thought it had a beautiful beachy vibe. I actually put it into my cart thinking I was going to purchase it, but then I remembered what it reminded me of, and that's the Jouer Tan Lines palette from last summer. I had that one in my cart as well for a long time. I almost pulled the trigger so many times and I ended up not doing it, and I'm glad because the reviews on that one ended up being not so great, but I just thought it has such a similar color story. You have that mint green, you have the deeper blue shimmer, you have the bright pop of yellow matte, you have that rosy pink shade, you have the matte brown color. I mean, again, there are some different shades too, but if you have the Jouer, I think it's really super close that you might not actually need the Buxom. Another one I thought of is the Violet Voss Flamingo palette. I'm not quite sure if this one is still around, but I actually have it in my collection. And again, I was just looking through and I found so many similar shades. You have the mint green again, you have the deeper blue shimmer, you have that rosy pink in here, you have the matte yellow. The Violet Voss has a lot of additional shades in it as well, so if you have that one, I feel like you have the Buxom and more. Another one that this kind of reminded me of is the Festival palette from Profusion. This has so many similar colors in it again. You have the bright matte yellow, you have the mint green, the deeper blue shimmer, the rosy pink, you have the matte chocolate brown, the bronzy shimmer. I mean, you really have almost every color from what I could see in the Festival palette. So if you already own this one, I would definitely skip the Buxom. And then the last one is a little bit of a stretch. It's not quite as similar as the others, but the Anastasia Riviera palette has a lot of similar colors in it. You have the bright pop of yellow, you have the rosy pink, the deep blue shimmer, the gold shimmer, the matte chocolate brown. There's definitely a lot of similarities with this one, but also some differences too. Next up, we have the Natasha Denona Mini Retro Palette. I actually got a ton of requests asking for dupes of this one, and a lot of you asking if the Lime Crime Venus XL2 was a dupe. So that's definitely the first thing I thought of when I saw it as well. And I actually have both of them, so I was able to swatch them side by side and see just how close they are. And honestly, they're not exactly the same. I think this is the situation again where it has a really similar vibe with the greens and the pinks, like that whole theme. But the greens in the Lime Crime palette are a little bit lighter in tone than the ones in the retro, and also the retro one, I feel like the pinks, while they're similar, especially the matte one has more of like a peachy pink sort of vibe. When you look at it next to the Lime Crime, that one looks more like a true pink. But at the same time, looking at the swatches, I feel like the two on either end, the shimmery pink and then the shimmery kind of champagne color, are very, very similar to each other. Another one I thought of is a dupe palette that I have for the Venus XL2, and that's the You Can Be Magic Spell palette. So this one's just a more affordable alternative to the Lime Crime, and this one, actually, when I swatched them side by side, I thought this one was a little bit closer. The greens in this palette are slightly darker, and the matte pink shade is actually more beigey than the Lime Crime, so this one isn't really an exact shade for shade dupe of the Lime Crime. Again, it has like the very similar vibe, and I think they tried to dupe it, but they didn't get the colors exactly right. So I think if you have either one of those palettes, you may not necessarily feel like you need to go out and buy the retro palette. If you don't have any of them though, I would say that the retro formula is definitely the best out of the three. The Lime Crime one has issues with a lot of the shades developing hard pan or just being difficult to pick up in general. And the Magic Spell one, it's just like an okay formula. It's nothing special. If you like this color story, that one's only, I think, $11.99. So it's a really good deal, and you're getting a lot more product than the Natasha Denona, but I just thought I would throw that out there about the formula. All right, so next up we have the BH Cosmetics Midnight Festival palette. I have the original Festival, and I love that palette. I'm so sad that they discontinued it. Honestly, I wish they would just bring that one back, but this one actually looks very similar. So first I wanted to show you the two side by side. We have the new one, Midnight Festival, with the pink background, and then we have the original Festival. And I actually think they duplicated some of the shades in here because I see a lot of similarities between these two. I think the new one maybe has some darker shades that the original Festival doesn't have. It just has more of those smoky kind of blues and purples, but if you have the original Festival, you might already have a lot of the colors that are in the Midnight Festival. And actually, when I first saw this Festival palette, I immediately thought of the Burn Book from Storybook Cosmetics, the Mean Girl collab that they did. I think this one, I mean, the packaging looks very similar. It has a lot of the same colors in it. The Storybook one has less shades, but again, if you have that one, you already have a lot of the colors that are in the BH palette. And then the last one I thought of was the Makeup Revolution and Patricia Bright collab. This one also has a lot of duplicate shades. You have that bright neon yellow, you have the bright greens, the bright blues. I mean, that sort of neon vibe that they have going on, you have a lot of those shades in the Makeup Revolution as well. Next up, I have one dupe for the new Viseart Mini Petite Pro Shushu palette. This one just launched at Sephora, and I thought it looked very, very similar to the Anastasia Amrezy palette, especially the left half of it. If I just chop off the other side, you can really then kind of of highlight the similarities between the two palettes. You have those pink kind of magenta shades in there. You also have the bronzy shimmer and the champagne shimmer. I mean, these two really look very much alike. So I think if you have the Amrezy palette, you might be able to go ahead and skip the Viseart one. I also got a lot of requests to dupe the new Melt Cosmetics Rust palette, and this one is really tough because there's one particular shade in it that is sort of like an orangey yellow that's really hard to replicate in any of the other palettes that I'm going to show you. But that being said, there are several warm tone palettes that look very, very similar to it. The first one being the Natasha Denona Sunset palette. This one, again, I think the yellow in the Natasha Denona palette is like a brighter yellow that the Rust palette doesn't have, but it does have that bright peachy shade. You have those deep warm browns and bronzes and oranges. So if you kind of cover up that bright pop of yellow, I do see a lot of similarities between these two, and I think at the end of the day you could get some really close kind of warm tone looks with it. Another one I think is a pretty close dupe is the Huda Beauty Warm Obsessions palette. This one again has a really similar color story. It doesn't have that bright pop of sort of peachy yellow that the Rust palette has, but you do have the bronze and all of those deep chocolatey rich browns, the pop of red, the ivory shade. So I think this is another one you could get incredibly similar looks out of. And then the last one I thought of is the Viseart Warm Edit palette. This one is probably the least similar out of all three, but I do see again some very dupeable shades in here. You have that rich chocolate brown, you have the brighter kind of yellow. This yellow isn't quite as bright as the one that's in the Natasha Denona. You also have that kind of orangey color, you have the deep red, the bronzy shimmer. This one does have more of a berry shade as well, which isn't in the Melt palette. And that one kind of throws my eye off a little bit, but if I cover that one up, you can see how close these two actually are. And then the last palette I have to dupe is the Artist Couture Supreme Nudes palette. I actually bought this one, and as I've been kind of comparing it to other ones in my collection, I came up with two palettes that it's really similar to, and they're both Anastasia. The first one is the Master Palette by Mario. I did think that this one looked really, really similar just looking at the two together in the pan. So I went ahead and swatched them side by side, and I found a lot of really almost identical shades. I do think the shimmer shades in the Artist Couture palette are way more metallic, while the ones in the Master palette are a little bit more on the smoother side. They're not quite as glittery looking. But I was able to match up a lot of shades that look really, really close. There are, of course, some shades that didn't line up with both palettes, so I didn't swatch those. I just swatched the 7 shades in both palettes that kind of matched up. But that may be enough for you to decide. If you already have the Mario palette, you may not need to go out and buy the Artist Couture. And then the other one is Soft Glam. This one I actually found more similar shades in, and I do think that Soft Glam has more of those metallic shimmers that line up a little bit better with the Artist Couture palette. Again, I wasn't able to match up each entire palette, but I did find 8 shades that are so incredibly similar when you see them swatched side by side. So the Artist Couture palette definitely has a very similar vibe to Soft Glam. Alright guys, so that's everything. I hope you enjoyed this video and found it helpful. If you did, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. And also, I'd love to hear from you guys down in the comments below. If you found any dupes for any of these palettes I talked about today, I would love to hear your thoughts, and it would definitely help everybody out if you have some additional dupes to share. So thank you guys so much for watching. Please don't forget to hit that subscribe button right in the corner of your screen, and I will see you all in my next video. Take care, guys. Bye!